I'm Gillian.
And I'm Hayden.
And
And
we're
we're
hooked. And welcome back to our dramaturgy podcast, brought to you by.
KU Theater and Dance.
And today, you'll see we have a very special guest with us. So, everyone, please give a warm welcome to Taylor Davis. Hi,
Hey.
Taylor.
Well, hey, how y'all
Thank
doing?
you so much for being with us today.
Yes, thank you for having me. So excited to be here on the Zoom.
On the Zoom, ready to go.
In the room on the Zoom, baby.
Okay.
So true. So true. So tell us, who are you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm Taylor. I am here because I am a somewhat recent grad of Millikin University. And when I was there, I graduated with degree in arts administration and theater and performance studies. Right now, I'm more on the business side of this industry, booking and entertainment. But when I was in college, a big part of my experience and kind of a lot of the research I like to do was around disability theater. A little bit of a personal note that kind of got me down that road. I myself am a differently abled person, and in the day, I was really interested in performance for my trajectory of life. And it was something that auditioning for colleges, looking at the future of this, I was really scared about. And just really didn't know a lot about this world and the history of, what people like me do and can do or not doing are doing in this industry. And so I got to devote a little bit of my time to delving more into that, and excited to be talking about it today.
Well, we are so excited to have you here. Obviously, the show that we're doing is called Hookman, and the central character, no spoilers, but a central character in this show does have in the script and in costume a hook for a hand. So Hayden and I, as the dramaturgs, thought it's really important for us to bring this topic into our conversation about this idea of disability in theater and where it comes from, where it's going. So I'm just kind of gonna lobby a question to get us started. And do you think you could kind of inform our audience and frankly me and Hayden too on this topic of disability and horror and villainy? Why do we see so many villains in stories that are differently abled?
Yeah. Honestly, and there's kind of a few different areas of this and no perfect answer, but kind of looking on the history side of things, a lot of this performance and almost freak show type tropes history comes from the freak shows themselves. So you're talking 1800s, 1900s. The people you saw on the stage, were to be gawked at, but also feared in a way, right? Like, even if you saw, a lot of people probably did American Horror Story, Evan Peters' character, we actually have the same hand, it looks a little different, but, that was a very real disability that still continues, right? All these people being put on display, but still locked in cages. Treated poorly, not giving accurate play or pay. And I think truly, if I had to guess, that's where a lot of this stems from, right? Just this idea of disability is something that people can lean into as an easy way to create a villain, an interesting character, something to be attached to, something to gawk at. Or feel bad for, all the emotions, right? Yeah
Because it seems to me like it is a long history of viewing differently abled bodies as the other. And we had our last episode, Hayden, that we did, we talked about the other, and we talked about queerness and horror. and
Right.
how a lot of villains are traditionally queer coded. And so I think, we see this through line running through stories and tropes about how do we make sure people know that somebody's meant to be evil? We other them in some way, right? Thank you for defining, first of all. Hayden, did you have any questions or follow-up comments, things to what Taylor just shared with us?
Yeah, I mean, actually, Gillian, I kind of want to talk about like the queerness aspect we talked about last week. Taylor, have you seen overlap with specific villains that kind of could be queer coded, but also do have like a disability?
Answer your question, yes. I mean, I think any of these other traits that a lot of narratives catch on to um, fall into the same realm of just people that are traditionally underrepresented, right? So you'll see crossovers with queerness, crossovers with race, crossovers with disability, and if it's not written into the character, you have scholars such as yourselves that, are able to look into these characters and find the places where maybe an author intended it, maybe they didn't, right? So absolutely.
Yeah, and I think too in like you are the expert in the room here, Taylor. So please, correct me if I'm wrong. But some of the things that I've noticed in a little bit of my research that I've been doing for the dramaturgy work for this show is that these tropes are one persistent. They keep coming back, but also it's not just necessarily differently abled bodies that we sort of showcase in these tropes, but it's any form of disability.
Exactly.
And I saw somebody on a blog, maybe not the most reputable thing to use for a dramaturgy source, but they were talking about how Dear Evan Hansen, this really popular musical right now, Tony Award winning musical, is still abiding by ableist tropes
Mm-hmm.
because of the way that Evan is dealing with this terrible social anxiety, which is a form of non-visible disability, and how it's like driving the story. And so that was really interesting to me. That, I mean, that musical is how old now? Not that old.
Oof. When were the times for that? When did Comet lose? That's the question. A few years ago, yeah.
I want to say 2017 is sticking
Yeah.
in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I mean, the fact that that really was not that long ago, if you're looking at a timeline, and we're still continuously using ableist tropes to tell stories.
Right.
Have
And
you done research into that?
yeah, I think it's a really slippery slope, right? Because, on one hand, you can argue, and I think a lot of even Dear Evan Hansen's like marketing, fell into this, you will be found, right? It's inviting the audience to see themselves in these characters in the audience, which a lot of theater, that's the goal, right? But it becomes a slippery slope of, okay, how much does then the narrative become all about that, um, where are the other humanistic qualities that come from people that, have visible, non-visible disabilities, or is it the only thing we're focusing on? And I think Dear Evan Hansen is actually a pretty good example of that. It could be kind of argued in many ways. But I think, specifically the marketing for that show was really interesting to me. Yeah. Yeah.
Taylor, do you want to talk more about how disabilities are viewed in like theater? Because I mean, like with like we mentioned, horror movies, it's a
Hmm.
huge thing. But it's like this has been the first play I've encountered with a disability
Hmm.
besides Ride the Cyclone, which is also like
Yeah.
very negative with how I believe it's Ricky is performed because he has a disability, but he's always been performed by an able-bodied actor.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm not as familiar with that, but I think there's blind characters in there too, right? Or I could be totally wrong.
Not sure. I mean, I know now I'm like trying to think. I
Could be
think
wrong. But even to what you're saying, yeah. Just and your question was kind of surrounding this villain, right? Um, I think it's great that you guys, this show specifically, I kind of wanted to touch on another villain that I feel maybe a few more people are familiar with is our other hooked friend, Captain Hook, right? One of the written characters that falls into this, this villain trope. It's in his name even, right? Which to me almost leans into the idea that his evilness, his bitterness falls into what is the hook. And granted, like the Peter Pan Disney, I think it's Disney. It's what, like an hour-long movie. It doesn't really go that deep into things, right? But when you are looking at things from a dramaturgical lens, sit back and think, okay, what is the reasoning for this pirate to not have a hand? Does it have anything to do with the story, right? Which then falls into what we're looking at with these tropes, right? And I'm not as familiar with the show that you all are doing, but you have a bit of a longer narrative to tell that story and to look at even the writing of this and see what parts can we highlight to a background that adequately tell the story of how this person may have become disabled and what is actually important. That's
That's such a good point because well, coincidentally, this is the second time that Captain Hook has made it into this podcast.
It's our most famous hooked friend, I gotta say.
Yeah, well, in our last podcast, we talked about how he's pretty queer-coded, right?
Yeah.
Which is, again, I think, adding into this conversation of villainy. But something you said, Taylor, really struck me, which was his name. And like thinking about it, Captain Hook is in the name, so that becomes his one identifier. Exactly. There is nothing else important about him as a character other than this hook, and that this hook equates evilness. And yeah, of course, it's a children's cartoon. It's an hour-long story. There's not room for us to give Captain Hook like a backstory, I guess, right? But the fact that that's what he's known for, then that becomes reciprocated in different cultural adaptations of him. I mean, Hayden, you were talking about Once Upon a Time. And correct me if I'm wrong, Captain Hook is a character in that television series, right?
He is. He's like one of the leads, but ABC actually kind of makes him like a protagonist in the show, and so he does and they actually change his name from Captain Hook. He just becomes Gillian. He becomes more human, even though he still has his visible disability.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's like a reclamation story happening. But I think most of the time we see Hook and we think evil, right? And Hayden, we've been doing a lot of research into the actual Hookman myth, which go back and watch our first episode if you want to know more. But when we see the Hookman character reciprocated and recirculated in culture, I mean, it's Candyman, which is a horror movie. It's I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is a horror movie. It's even the hash slinging slasher, which is meant to be scary, right?
Yeah. And even a step further, heck, it's almost Halloween. Most of your pirate costumes, what do they come with? Well, they come with an eye patch, number one. They also sometimes come with a hook for a hand. So I think, like, especially with, I know I keep talking Peter Pan hook, but like, it's also really important to know that is a children's movie. That is the first thing, maybe one of the first introduce, of a child to someone that is differently abled. And, not that many people are going around with, such hook as Captain Hook has, but you associate that difference with the trope that it comes with. And it goes all the way down to the Halloween costumes. It's crazy.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say your brain looks for patterns as it's developing. So like eventually you lock onto this pattern that, oh, this person looks differently from me, therefore they must act differently from me, which equates badness or wrongness. And I'm thinking of I don't know, maybe some of our audience will know this, maybe some won't, but The Goonies.
Mhm.
Are we familiar with that? Okay.
Yeah.
So a little bit, yeah. But I can't for the life of me think of the character's name. But there is a character that does have a physical disability in that movie. And at first they're like scary, and you kind of have to watch the movie to learn that they're not a bad guy, right? Like they're actually this like caring, important character. But I think that like they in the Goonies, which is a movie from the 80s, so yes, a little while ago now. They're even relying on the audience to say, "Oh, person looks different, they are bad," in order to have that sort of story unfold, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And Hayden, that ropes right back in with, talking about queerness in these characters too, maybe not even that they're evil, but just, maybe that is their one identity, is that, they're struggling with their identity. They're hypersexual. I'm looking at the different models, they're unable to like, become accustomed to daily, the cliche, like high school, not to say that that isn't a very real feeling that a lot of people have, but you got to be careful with it,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah. So why do you think this trope persists? Like even when like I think people have a knowledge that like, oh, that's wrong. We shouldn't continue to use this trope, but we do.
Yeah. I think, and again, no one answer for this, but I think it's easy, right? You know, let's say you are, doing a community theater show, maybe you don't have the biggest Broadway budget ever. And you're trying to portray this actor as someone villainous and scary or whatever it may be. Well, what do people go to? They go to prosthetics. They go to, even the tone of people's, voices. They'll change the tone of their voice to reflect this evilness. They'll change their stance, the way they walk. They walk with a limp, right? And it just becomes an easy thing for people to do, right? Versus, other options to create, a character that can be evil but doesn't need all that. And that can come with writing. Sometimes the writing isn't very great, right? But I think for a lot of theaters, it's an easy way. I think also a lot part of it is just a lack of knowledge, right? A lot of people don't blink an eye. Even when we're talking about the hook, they don't blink an eye that a pirate costume comes with a hand or a hook for a hand, and that could be interpreted as something different. And that's not wokeness. That's just, you know, recognizing these patterns that we've kind of like become ingrained with. And it's like, oh my gosh, wait a second, you really have to think about that. So I think, it's just a learning thing as well. We're not at a point yet where, we look at someone who has, a visible disability, or talk to someone with a non-visible disability, or learn of it, and don't treat it as something we, are afraid of, discriminated against, even if it is in the slightest of ways. So I think the other half of it is just lack of knowledge. And I think especially with all the different platforms and everything we have now to communicate, it's going to be interesting seeing like our generation continue to go through this. People always say it started with Hamilton, right? This idea of even something, which I'm putting this in quotes, watch me, blind casting, rethinking theater, and looking at both stories and casting ethics to include all bodies in the room. I think we're getting there, but it's still, again, a slippery slope. It can be interpreted in different ways. We don't want to lean into this, sometimes Dear Evan Hansening, where it becomes something that is just so apparent. If I, not that I'm important, but like, if I had it my way in my dream world, we would just have integrated casts, right? You don't blink an eye at someone who, may look a little different than the normal being, or sound or think differently. and they're part of the ensemble, or they're the ingenue, or they're any part of the production, even behind the scenes. Can't forget about them, right?
Mhm.
And it's just not, you just don't even blink an eye, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So you are a director. You have directed in the past before. Yeah, yes, you are.
Not currently.
Don't count yourself short. I've seen your shows. You've directed, and I think this is also an important topic. Like, how do we? I think, in one instance, it's important that we make disability visible, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it is seen on the stage, that it's seen on the screen, it's there. But how do we continue to work so that it's not just visible, but just a part of art, and a part of the stories we tell, and a part of the good stories we tell?
Yeah. I mean, even kind of to what I said is just being, it's almost like being like aware of it, but also not thinking too hard about it.
Mm.
Like you say, you don't want to, this sounds terrible, like you don't want to get too woke, because it really does bode not so great on the audiences, even the people involved in the production, right? I think this is why I think the role of the dramaturg is so, so, so important, and that word needs to be used, that more people need to know about what dramaturgs do, because I feel like they are a vital part of that conversation of what are the what ifs of this, of these characters, what are the what ifs of this production, what are we, what era are we in, how do the people here communicate with people of all kinds, right? um and filling in that information so that when it does appear on stage, it's not forced, it's natural, people are knowledgeable, even if it's just a production, and you have people on the team that need different accommodations, it's just something that everyone's aware of and can help where they need, and we just go along with our day. So I think, every role on the team has a part to play, and just being aware and educated, whether it be on the creative side, the tech side, the admin side, so that as years go by, it just becomes rote, it just becomes the regular.
Yeah, I'd like to believe we can get there.
Oh yeah.
I
Oh
think
yeah.
that's
And
the beauty of the theater community, right?
oh yeah. And I think there are some really awesome things that are out there and that people have seen. I mean, we've definitely, come a long way, from, even the, the American with Disabilities Act. That was in the 90s. Which scary, it wasn't that long ago, but like in terms of, looking at even equitable pay and casting, we've come away, but um, still needs to be discussed with even the youngest of kiddos, in the medium we're absorbing, whether it be live theater, TV, music, all the different art forms. Yeah.
Taylor, so like we kind of touched up on how it's like changing now, but are there any shows or any specifics? I know Twitter was in a frenzy when I think it was the Netflix Witches show came out, and
Ah,
it was a step backwards from where we were.
tell me about it. Yes, I was angry too. I love Anne Hathaway. It's Anne Hathaway, right? She was
Yeah.
Yep.
Mhm.
yeah, yeah. And actually, so like I said, I have a limb difference.
Mhm.
Um, I am a part of a few different advocacy groups for that. And when I tell you, people were jumping on it, very, very disappointing. Um, because, and I didn't watch it, but I can tell you, even from, the marketing, I could, oh no, can you hear me? Okay, there we go. From the marketing, I can tell, like, what what does this have to do with the story? And I think there was, I can't remember if it was even the art, because it was a children's book before. Um,
Mhm.
and I can't remember if the art did reflect the three fingers or not, or if that's the way that they kind of went with it.
That was movie
Regardless,
production choice.
regardless, I
Yeah.
mean, look at the witch that you have coming out in theaters in November. She got her point across without, having a limb difference. She's green. That's another topic. That's a whole nother story, right? But it goes to show you, just even the slightest little thing can really hurt a community and really set off a message that maybe isn't the best one to send out. But yeah, I think that was one of the bigger ones recently. There's also been some really good things too. I know the third movie recently came out of A Quiet Place. And I love that movie. I think it's a great movie, great series, but you know, it took what could have been something very maybe not so great and created this really cool narrative, right? The casting part of it too, hired people that were actually living the thing. And even if you take that on a small scale, the things that people that are hard of hearing face, right? We don't, God, I hope we don't have such monsters as A Quiet Place, right? But thinking about and recognizing those people in our daily lives and maybe some of the things that they could go through too. There were all these people in this world all going through the same thing, and then this is just how this family is dealing with it. But I loved that because I believe, if I heard correctly, the ethics behind it all were really great. And the actress, the one of the children, the actress, was a great advocate for all that. So there are really good examples out there, great theaters. I'm going to shout some out. So if people want to check them out, but I know like National Disability Theater is a thing. The Non-Traditional Casting Project is an organization that kind of focuses on this idea of people in the room, right? Who do we have in the room? Theater Breaking Through Barriers is like one of the first theaters that they both, the productions and they're people that run the company are people with disabilities and are just very good and very careful with how they do their productions. Like I know one of the more notable examples too was the deaf production of Spring Awakening was kind of one of the big things that shook the theater community, but really because it bode so well. Beautiful production, ethics behind it were great. And I feel like set a good example of what, redefining, especially these texts that don't define a character as anything, the impact of having someone different in the room that you wouldn't expect. But kind of recognizing disability, that's something I do celebrate and do think is really great of hyper highlighting something, right? Because even going back to A Quiet Place, if you're someone that's hard of hearing, that changes the entire experience from what people may think of initially, right? Yeah. For Spring Awakening, right? These characters, that changes the entire experience. Shakespearean texts, if you want to add like exploring what these characters could have been and maybe were intended to be back then, and highlighting that in a professional way can be really, really impactful if done right. And that was a really good example of that.
Yeah, because I mean, at the heart, representation matters.
Yeah.
Representation matters so much. To see yourself depicted on stage, on screen, in ways that your lived experience isn't vilified or even just sort of thrown in there for comic relief or for whatever, but really, extrapolated in a story and meant to mean something, it changes the way you view the world.
Yeah.
I just think that we are finally having conversations about representation. And I've seen all those videos of like little kids on TikTok that see themselves in movies and stories, and they get so emotional. And it's such a beautiful thing to see that I think as a community, as a theatrical movement, that's what we're heading towards.
I know, like, when Luca came out, the dad that had the limb difference, and it was
Yeah.
just a split, he wasn't even in it for that long, but like at least the pages I were following, just the support that came from that, like it was so cool. It was really cool to see, some of my friends represented in that character, and even it really just goes to show even the slightest little thing can make a big impact, or maybe start a conversation that needs to happen. I'm thinking about, like, what was it? Like Good Luck Charlie. They had a same-sex couple.
Yeah.
And I thought it was handled well. I know there was some outrage with it, but like it was done tastefully. It was cute, and I think even just those little bits can really get us somewhere. So, and especially in children's media. Oh my God. Come on now.
Yes.
Let's see.
Yes. Hayden, what were you gonna say?
Well, I just said it normalizes it. It's like even if it's just like 10 seconds, if you see a queer character, someone with a disability, it brings more life, like literal life, like reflection from what we're living into the media that we're consuming. And it's not putting these characters as villain, it's just putting them as a normal person, even though
Right.
they may not be the protagonist, they're just someone living their life. And there's so
Yeah.
much of those background characters. Like I
Yeah.
just love ensembles, and like you were pitching earlier, Taylor, on how we should just cast people in the ensemble if they have a disability or not, and that just brings so much more life,
Yeah.
normalcy to every, like basically the theater and then reflection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a different way too, I'm thinking about this. Like in an academic setting, right? I have very terrible anxiety and depression disorder. I have since I was very little. Um, and I've been like pretty highly medicated for it for a long time now. But when I was in high school, you didn't get education plans or 504. Like that didn't like you powered through it. You
Mhm.
said good luck. I don't care that you have like an anxiety disorder. You'll take the test like everyone else will. But my sister, who's several years younger than me, had an education plan. She's in college now still with like an individualized education plan. And her experience is so much different than mine was, but in a really beneficial and like healthy way. And so I
Mhm.
think even like in those instances where if it just becomes normalized that everyone lives a different lived experience, that it's not wrong or bad, it's just how people are. I think that'll change the world and that'll change the
Mhm.
way we interact with each other.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. We're not erasing this, we're not erasing this kind of thing. We're just normalizing it,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel like that's where a lot of people get caught up is, oh my gosh, what's the line? What's the line? You don't have to think about it too hard. You have 10 fingers, I have 7. You live in Kansas, I live in Missouri, right? Like it's just who we are. And if my story gets chosen to be put on stage, awesome. But like if it doesn't, like it should just be treated the same, right?
Mm,
It's just a
yeah.
part of you, you know. No
Yeah.
need to magnetize one part.
Yes. So Taylor, you are sort of I would consider you a jack of all trades when it comes to theater and theatricality. Like really, people watching and Hayden, there is not a thing that Taylor hasn't done when it comes to theater. She has done so
Little.
much. But I know you have also had some experience with like design fields. You've worked in costume shops. And so like are there also ways that we can sort of get rid of ableist narratives through design and technical approaches in our theater and entertainment spaces as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say it. Number one, listen to your dramaturg too. It doesn't even go as far. The art. I shouldn't say artistic, but like the story part of these productions. It's your costumes, it's your lighting, it's your sound. You have to look at all these things anyways to make sure they're appropriate for the production. Um, there should be that extra step in there too of you know, where does representation fall into this, right? Even so, I didn't do as much lighting or sound, but like I did work with costumes, and it even goes as far as, you know, is this color flattering on this person, right? Or was this, you know, maybe more of a stock costume that we have that we're just going to put this person into, and maybe it's 30 years old and maybe it didn't time right, but it isn't flattering on the person that it's fitting, right? So making sure it's appropriate for the production, but also is comfortable for the actor, right? Yes, they're stepping into somebody else's role, usually 99% of the time, but it's still a living, breathing human being. So looking for the accessibility in that, uh, the comfortability, flattery, you know, that goes into lighting too. You know, not all lights are made for one type of skin color. You know, you have to accommodate um, to represent your people well, and to make sure they're advocated for, right? So I think more of that is on the kind of the prep work of all of it, right? In terms of technical theater, you know, construction. But by all means is something that should have just as much research done, right?
Yeah.
And there are some, I know there's some wicked people out there that that really do consider that too, you know about color theory and know about even what emotions like different kinds of lines evoke. You know, it's the same with people.
Yeah.
What is the story you're telling?
Yeah. And
Oh,
I
you have.
remember when you and I were in college together and we were kind of sort of having conversations just about differently shaped bodies on
Mhm.
stage and how that is sort of a new idea
Yeah.
in costumes and in casting as well.
Mhm.
And we talked about how like it's as simple as even just getting different sized dress forms
Mhm.
in the shop, right? So yeah, I think these all sort of fall under this wider discussion we're having, but there are so many ways to make different lived experiences part of the stories we're telling.
Yeah. Yeah. I think another kind of interesting part to it all, and I feel like one of the more hot topics,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's the word I'm looking for, are like fat suits, right? Padding for
Yeah.
characters. Where is it necessary and where is it totally not necessary? Usually it's not necessary, right? There's a really cool group that I love to follow. They came to our school. They're called the Broadway Body Positivity Project,
Mm-hmm.
and they're really good about kind of like calling people out for especially bigger productions, foreign productions, of their use of fat suits, use of prosthetics, where it's just not necessary, and highlighting where it's done really tastefully. I know there was, I couldn't even tell you where it was, but they posted about one of these productions of Beauty and the Beast, and you had a belle of color and just dressed in this beautiful, still that blue dress, but a different shade of blue. It still evoked the same feeling, but it was something different and refreshing and beautiful. And she was a plus size actress as well, but they just dressed her so beautifully into what she needed, right? So, and to me, you notice something for the goodness of it, but you really don't blink an eye the rest of the production because it's done tastefully.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting, going back to the hook for a hand, just additions. I think more costume like because that's where I live, but it's every part of production.
Mm-hmm.
Taylor, you talked about care a little bit before, like off camera. Could you talk about that now and like other resources that maybe some students in
Yeah,
the
yeah,
audience?
absolutely. So me and Gillian are friends podcast. We went to school together, undergrad. And when I was there, I was part of a group called CARE, Creatives for Artistic and Realistic Equity. Something started at another university and we carried on here, but our goal was to both like amplify the voices of traditionally underrepresented groups in the arts, and celebrating that. So I was kind of telling Hayden and Gillian earlier, we did a lot of workshops, we did a lot of talkbacks, educational seminars of all the different areas of theater where you know advocacy is so important or maybe wasn't thought about before. Some examples, we had a designer come in and talk about how to light people of color on stage, hairstyles, something that you don't find in many places, but is also important. We had dietitians come in and talk about how to keep your body safe and, how health looks different for actors and dancers and artists. And really just finding ways to tailor and advocate for a fairer experience for people that are going into the industry or celebrating the industry. So that being said, while that was at Millikin University, there are so many groups out there that are doing the same thing. Highly encourage, if this is something you're interested in, it takes a quick Google search and there's a whole plethora of different avenues you can go through. Like I said earlier, Broadway Body Positivity Project is one of them. Even just supporting individual artists that are differently abled. They actually have a lot of things to say, and a lot of them do activism work as well. Supporting these theaters that also support differently abled productions, casting, hiring. There's some scholarly work out there that's really interesting. You really can go into a deep dark hole for whatever area or avenue you want to research. But I would say to do your part is to just be educated, right? Just look into the things you're interested in, ask questions. You don't have to become an expert on the topic. I know Gillian said I'm not, right? I really am not. It's just something that, I asked a bunch of questions about. Maybe I wrote a little paper about it or two, but really just stayed within the community. I find out what I find out through these Facebook pages, these Instagram accounts I follow, just to know what's kind of going on in the industry and where I can help, whether I'm in it or just a patron, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're so welcome. Yes.
That was such a Taylor, I have loved having you here. You one are just a source of positivity, and you have been for me for a really long time. And so I'm really excited to introduce you to the KU community. But also I just want to thank you for sharing the information. Kind of like you said, put this information out there is how these conversations start. And so I'm really thankful that you took time to join us and to bring your resources and your wealth of knowledge. Hayden, anything else you want to ask Taylor or share or?
Not really. I just want to say thank you to Taylor. I mean, like you said, it really starts with and like Jillian just said too, it just really starts with getting educated or making that search to have the conversations.
Yeah.
Because be able to have these conversations if it wasn't for Twitter, if it wasn't for you being here to educate us and then to educate the KU community. So just thank you.
You're so welcome. And to whomever this podcast goes out to, this spans way beyond theater. We use theater, we use the arts as a way of telling these stories, in a lot of ways, putting them out to bigger groups of people. But, even just educating yourself about the people that are in your community, right? Like even if you don't see maybe someone on stage that has something, it may be some person in your life, right? But feeling comfortable enough to educate yourself, ask the questions, be curious, and, expand your horizons of the people that are in your life and all the beautiful things and ways people can work, ways people look, et cetera, et cetera.
Yes. Well, to our audience at large, hopefully something in this conversation struck you, inspired you, made you interested, curious about this as a research topic for all of those research papers you have coming up, right? We are at midterms. But most importantly, I hope that this starts a conversation that makes you want to come see our show. So please come see Hookman running November 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th,
Not
6th, 7th, not the 4th. We are dark that day, but
that's my birthday. Nothing happens on that day. It's my day.
So I'm Gillian.
I'm Hayden.
I'm Taylor.
And we're hooked. Bye, everyone. Thanks for watching.